Professor Richard Crawford had been teaching calculus at Riverside University for over 2 decades. He was the kind of professor who wore the same brown tweed jacket every Tuesday and Thursday, carried a leather briefcase that looked older than most of his students, and prided himself on being tough but fair. At least that's what he told himself. It was the first day of the fall semester, and the lecture hall was packed with nervous freshmen and a few transfer students trying to find seats. The room smelled like new notebooks and anxiety. Professor Crawford stood at the front, organizing his notes while students shuffled in, whispering to each other about what they'd heard about his class. Some had been warned he was difficult. Others heard he was brilliant. Most were just hoping to pass. Among the sea of students, a young man named Devin Walker found a seat in the 3rd row. He wasn't trying to sit too close or too far back, just somewhere in the middle where he could see and hear clearly. Devin was a transfer student from a community college across town, and this was his first day at a 4-year university. He'd worked 2 jobs to save enough money to be here, and he wasn't about to waste the opportunity. As Professor Crawford began his introduction to the course, Devin pulled out a somewhat worn tablet to take notes. It wasn't the latest model, but it worked fine for what he needed. He listened carefully as the professor outlined the syllabus, the grading policy, and his expectations. Crawford had a commanding presence, the kind of voice that made you sit up straighter in your seat. Then came the actual lecture. Limits and continuity. The professor wrote equations on the board with confidence, explaining each concept with the air of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. For most students in the room, this was brand new territory. They scribbled frantically in their notebooks, trying to keep up with every word. Devin, however, wasn't writing as much. He nodded occasionally, sometimes tilting his head slightly when the professor explained a concept. He looked almost comfortable, like someone listening to a song they'd heard before. He wasn't being disrespectful or distracted. He was simply processing the information differently than his classmates. Professor Crawford noticed this about 20 minutes into the lecture. His eyes kept drifting back to Devin, watching him sit there without the panic that usually gripped first-day calculus students. Something about it bothered him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Maybe it was the confidence. Maybe it was something else entirely. The professor continued his lecture, but part of his mind was elsewhere. He found himself wondering if this student was actually paying attention or just pretending to understand. There was only one way to find out. "You there," Professor Crawford said suddenly, his voice cutting through the lecture hall. He pointed directly at Devin. "3rd row with the tablet. You seem quite relaxed with this material." The entire classroom went silent. Every head turned to look at Devin. This was the moment every student dreaded on the first day of class, being singled out and put on the spot. Some students looked relieved it wasn't them. Others looked at Devin with sympathy. Devin looked up calmly, meeting the professor's gaze. "Yes, sir. Since you appear so comfortable, perhaps you'd like to come up and solve a problem for the class." There was something in Crawford's tone that wasn't quite friendly. It had an edge to it, a challenge. "Sure," Devin said simply. He stood up and made his way down to the front of the classroom. He wasn't rushing, but he wasn't dragging his feet either. Just walking like someone who'd been asked to do something normal. Professor Crawford turned to the board and wrote out a problem. It wasn't one of the simple examples he'd been working through. This was something more complex, a limit problem that involved L'Hopital's rule, a technique they wouldn't typically cover until week 3 of the course. The equation sprawled across the board, full of fractions and exponents that made several students in the front row exchange worried glances. "Take your time," Crawford said, although his tone suggested he didn't expect Devin to solve it at all. Devin stepped up to the board and picked up a piece of chalk. He studied the problem for maybe 10 seconds, long enough that some students probably thought he was stuck. Then his hand started moving. He wrote out the first step, applying L'Hopital's rule correctly. His handwriting was clear and confident. He took the derivative of the numerator, then the derivative of the denominator, writing each step on a separate line so it was easy to follow. No hesitation. No erasing. Just steady progress through the problem. The classroom was absolutely silent now. Even the students who didn't fully understand what they were watching could sense that something unexpected was happening. This wasn't someone guessing or getting lucky. This was someone who actually knew what he was doing. Devin simplified the resulting expression. combining like terms and reducing fractions with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing something many times before. Within 2 minutes, he'd arrived at the final answer. He set down the chalk and stepped back from the board. Professor Crawford stared at the solution. It was correct. Completely, undeniably correct. Every step was proper. The logic was sound. This wasn't supposed to happen. He'd chosen that problem specifically because it was beyond what a typical student should be able to handle on the first day. The silence stretched on for another moment before someone in the back of the room started clapping. Then another student joined in. Within seconds, about half the class was applauding. They might not have understood all the math, but they understood that their classmate had just done something impressive. "That's correct," Professor Crawford said finally. His voice sounded strained, like he was forcing the words out. "Though I suspect you've seen this material before." "I've studied some calculus on my own," Devin replied simply. He didn't elaborate. He didn't boast. He just stated a fact. "Lucky guess," Crawford muttered, though it was quiet enough that he might have been talking to himself. But several students in the front row heard it, and they looked at each other with raised eyebrows. That hadn't been luck. Everyone could see that. Devin walked back to his seat without saying anything else. As he sat down, the girl next to him leaned over. "That was amazing," she whispered. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Just practice," Devin whispered back with a small smile. Professor Crawford tried to continue with his lecture, but the energy in the room had shifted. Students were looking at Devin with curiosity now, wondering who this guy was and how he knew advanced calculus on the first day of class. The professor's authority, usually so absolute on the first day, had been quietly challenged. For the rest of the class period, Crawford didn't call on Devin again. He finished his lecture on schedule and dismissed everyone right on time. As students filed out, several stopped by Devin's seat to introduce themselves or ask questions about his background. Devin was friendly but modest, not making a big deal out of what had happened. But as he packed up his tablet and headed out of the lecture hall, Devin had a sinking feeling in his stomach. He'd seen the look on Professor Crawford's face. It wasn't respect or curiosity. It was something else, something that felt like the beginning of a problem rather than the end of one. He'd been in situations like this before, times when being good at something made certain people uncomfortable. Times when his presence challenged someone's expectations in ways they didn't appreciate. He'd hoped college would be different, that professors would encourage students who showed talent rather than feel threatened by it. As Devin walked across campus toward his next class, he tried to shake off the worry. Maybe he was reading too much into it. Maybe the professor had just been surprised and would be fine once he got used to having a prepared student in class. Maybe this wouldn't turn into anything. But deep down, Devin suspected that his first day at Riverside University had just set something in motion. Something that was going to make the next few months a lot more complicated than they needed to be. He just didn't know yet how complicated things were going to get. The next class meeting came 2 days later on Thursday morning. Devin arrived a few minutes early and took the same seat in the third row. A couple of students from Monday's class waved at him or nodded in recognition. Word had apparently spread about what happened on the first day. Professor Crawford walked in exactly on time, carrying his leather briefcase and wearing a different jacket but the same serious expression. He set up his notes, took attendance, and launched into the day's lecture on derivatives. Everything seemed normal at first. About 15 minutes into class, Crawford paused mid-explanation. "Let's see if everyone's keeping up," he said, scanning the room. His eyes landed on Devin almost immediately. "Devin, isn't it? Come solve this one." He wrote a new problem on the board. It was more complex than what he'd been explaining, involving the chain rule and product rule combined. Again, it was material they'd normally cover later in the course. Devin went to the board and worked through it methodically. He got the correct answer. When he returned to his seat, a few students gave him quiet fist bumps or thumbs up. This became a pattern. Every single class, without fail, Professor Crawford would call on Devin. Sometimes once, sometimes 3 or 4 times. The problems were always harder than what everyone else got asked. They were always beyond what they'd covered so far, and Devin always solved them. By the end of the second week, it was obvious to everyone in the class what was happening. The girl who sat next to Devin, whose name was Lisa, brought it up one day after class. "Why does he keep doing that to you?" she asked as they walked out of the lecture hall. It's like he's trying to catch you not knowing something. Devin shrugged. Some teachers are just like that. But he doesn't do it to anyone else, Lisa pointed out. He asked me one question all week and it was super easy. You get the hardest problems every day. Other students had noticed too. In the hallways before class, Devin could hear them talking about it. Some thought the professor was testing Devin because he showed promise. Others thought it seemed unfair, like Crawford had something to prove. A few students started keeping a tally of how many times Devin got called on versus everyone else. The numbers weren't even close. Devin tried not to let it get to him. He came to class, answered the questions when called on, and focused on learning. But it was wearing on him. Every class felt like a performance where he had to prove himself over and over again. There was no room to relax, no chance to just be a regular student. The third week of class, things got worse. Professor Crawford started adding commentary to his questions. Let's see if our star pupil can handle this one, he'd say with a tight smile before writing a particularly nasty problem on the board. Or, this isn't high school math anymore, but let's give it a try. The tone was sharp, cutting. Other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats when Crawford talked like that. It felt mean-spirited in a way that went beyond tough teaching. Devin could see some of his classmates looking at him with sympathy or anger on his behalf, but Devin kept his cool. He'd walk to the board, solve the problem, and sit back down. He never complained, never argued, never showed that it bothered him, even though it absolutely did. One Thursday in late September, Professor Crawford outdid himself. He wrote a problem on the board that involved multivariable calculus. This wasn't just beyond Calculus 2. This was material from Calculus 3 or even higher. The equation looked like something from an advanced math class, the kind that made even good students feel intimidated. Mr. Walker, Crawford said, and there was definite smugness in his voice now, since you found my previous problem so manageable, perhaps you'd like to try something with a bit more substance. The classroom went quiet. A few students actually gasped when they saw the problem. It involved partial derivatives and multiple variables, concepts that most of them had never even heard of. This felt different from the other times. This felt like Crawford was trying to embarrass Devin in front of everyone. Devin stood up and walked to the board. He looked at the problem for a longer moment this time, maybe 20 or 30 seconds. Long enough that some students probably thought he was finally stuck. Crawford crossed his arms, waiting. Then Devin picked up the chalk and started writing. He recognized the problem structure and began working through the partial derivatives. His handwriting filled the board, line after line of careful mathematics. About halfway through, he paused, looked at what he'd written, and then erased a section. Several students leaned forward, thinking he'd made a mistake. But Devin wasn't fixing an error. He was changing his approach. He started writing again, this time using a different method, something involving matrices and transformations. It was more elegant, more efficient than the standard approach. The math flowed across the board in a way that was almost beautiful, if you understood what you were looking at. When Devin finished and stepped back, the room was completely silent for about 3 seconds. Then someone in the back row stood up and started clapping. Other students joined in immediately. Within moments, half the class was on their feet applauding. Some were cheering. Professor Crawford's face went bright red. His jaw was clenched so tight you could see the muscles working. He hadn't expected this. He'd been certain that problem would finally stump Devin. Instead, Devin had not only solved it, but had done it using advanced techniques that Crawford himself might not have thought of. That's enough, Crawford snapped at the applauding students. This is a classroom, not a theater. The students slowly sat down, but the energy in the room had completely changed. They weren't just impressed by Devin anymore. They were upset with the professor. The attempt to humiliate Devin had backfired spectacularly. Class dismissed, Crawford said abruptly. There were still 15 minutes left in the period, but he started gathering his papers with sharp, angry movements. We'll pick this up next time. Students filed out slowly, many stopping to talk to Devin or pat him on the shoulder. Lisa walked out with him, along with 3 other students from the class. That was incredible, said a guy named Tom who usually sat in the back. Where did you learn to do that? That was like graduate-level stuff. I've just studied a lot of math on my own, Devin said. He was trying to downplay it, but his hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The confrontation had affected him more than he wanted to admit. "This has gone too far," Lisa said firmly. "The way he treats you isn't okay. Every single class he singles you out. And that today? That was him trying to make you look stupid in front of everyone." "Yeah, but it didn't work," Tom added with a grin. "You made him look stupid instead." Devin appreciated the support, but he felt uneasy. He'd embarrassed Professor Crawford, even though that hadn't been his intention. He'd just answered the question truthfully, shown his work honestly. But he knew from experience that making someone in power look bad, even accidentally, often made things worse. Over the next few days, Devin noticed other changes. Students started seeking him out for help with homework. Study groups invited him to join. People recognized him around campus and would stop to ask questions about math or just to chat. It felt good to be appreciated by his peers, but Professor Crawford's attitude didn't improve. If anything, it got colder. He still called on Devin constantly, but now he barely looked at him when he did it. The questions remained hard, but Crawford stopped making snide comments. Instead, there was just icy silence when Devin solved problems correctly. The other students in class started getting frustrated on Devin's behalf. One day, when Crawford called on Devin for the 4th time in 30 minutes, a student named Kevin raised his hand. "Professor, maybe you could call on someone else?" "Devin's answered a lot already today." Crawford's eyes narrowed. "I'll decide who I call on in my classroom, thank you. If you're so eager to participate, perhaps you'd like to answer the next question." He wrote an extremely difficult problem on the board and called on Kevin, who struggled and eventually had to admit he didn't know how to solve it. The message was clear. Don't question my methods, but the students were paying attention now. They saw the pattern, they saw the unfairness, and word was spreading beyond just their classroom. Other students in the math department heard about the calculus professor, who seemed to have it out for one particular student. A few teaching assistants heard the stories. Whispers started circulating in the faculty lounge. Devin tried to focus on his other classes, his part-time job at the campus library, his studying. But calculus class hung over everything like a dark cloud. He dreaded Tuesdays and Thursdays. The constant pressure to perform, to prove himself over and over again, was exhausting. One evening, Devin sat in the library after his shift ended, staring at his calculus homework. The problems were straightforward, easy compared to what Crawford made him do in class. But he felt worn down, tired in a way that went beyond just physical exhaustion. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Lisa, asking if he wanted to join their study group. Devin thought about it, then replied yes. Maybe it would help to be around people who actually appreciated his skills instead of resenting them. As he packed up his stuff, Devin caught his reflection in one of the library's windows. He looked tired. The semester was only a month old, and he already felt like he'd been through a battle. He wondered how much longer this could go on. How many more classes of being singled out and challenged and tested could he handle? But Devin had been through hard things before. He'd worked 2 jobs while going to community college. He'd studied calculus on his own using library books and free online courses because his high school didn't offer advanced math. He'd overcome obstacles that would have stopped other people. He could handle this too. He just wished he didn't have to. Dr. Helen Martinez had been the head of the mathematics department at Riverside University for 6 years. She was known for being fair, approachable, and fiercely protective of students. So when she started hearing rumors about one of her professors targeting a student, she paid attention. It started with small things. A teaching assistant mentioned something in passing. A student sent an anonymous email through the department feedback system. Then Dr. Martinez ran into one of Devin's classmates at the campus coffee shop. And the student, a young woman named Lisa, was more direct. "Professor Crawford is treating one of our classmates really unfairly," Lisa said. "He calls on him every single class with the hardest problems, makes comments that sound mean, and it's obvious he's trying to make him look bad. But the thing is, the student always solves the problems anyway because he's actually brilliant." Dr. Martinez asked for more details. Lisa explained what had been happening for the past 5 weeks. The constant singling out, the problems beyond the course level, the snide remarks. The way Crawford's behavior had only gotten worse after Devin continued to solve everything correctly. "What's the student's name?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Devin Walker. He's a transfer student, honestly. He's probably the best math student in the entire class, maybe the entire department. But Professor Crawford acts like he's trying to catch him failing instead of helping him succeed. That night, Dr. Martinez looked through her records and found Devon's file. What she saw made her frown. His placement exam scores were exceptional, in the 99th percentile. There were notes from the admissions office recommending he be placed in advanced courses, possibly skipping ahead to differential equations or even higher. Yet somehow Devon had been enrolled in Calculus 2, a basic required course. Dr. Martinez checked who had approved the course placement. Professor Richard Crawford, in his role as undergraduate advisor for mathematics students. This didn't sit right with her. A student with those scores shouldn't be in a basic calculus course. Either Crawford had missed the recommendations, which seemed unlikely for someone so detail-oriented, or he'd ignored them. Either option looked good. Dr. Martinez decided she needed to see for herself what was happening in that classroom. The next Tuesday morning, she slipped into the back of Crawford's lecture hall about 5 minutes after class started. She sat in the last row where Crawford wouldn't easily notice her, pulled out a notebook and watched. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. Crawford lectured on integration techniques. Students took notes. He called on a few students with basic questions. It looked like a typical calculus class. Then Crawford paused and looked around the room. His eyes settled on a young black man in the third row. Dr. Martinez recognized him from his student photo. Devon Walker. "Devon," Crawford said, "come work this problem." He wrote something on the board that made Dr. Martinez's eyebrows rise. It was an improper integral with a convergence test component. That was definitely beyond Calculus 2 material. That was the kind of problem you'd see in advanced calculus or real analysis. Devon walked to the board calmly, like he'd done this 100 times before. And based on what Dr. Martinez had heard, he probably had. He picked up the chalk and started working through the problem. His approach was methodical and correct. He identified the integral as improper, set up the limit properly, and evaluated it step by step. But then Devon did something that made Dr. Martinez lean forward in her seat. After getting the answer using the standard method, he wrote alternative approach on the board and solved it again using a different technique that was more efficient. It was the kind of mathematical insight that some graduate students struggled to develop. When Devon returned to his seat, Dr. Martinez noticed several students patting him on the back or giving him quiet encouragement. This was clearly a regular occurrence. She also noticed the expression on Crawford's face. It wasn't pride in a talented student. It was something closer to resentment. After class ended, Dr. Martinez waited for students to clear out, then approached Devon as he was packing up his things. "Devon Walker?" she asked with a warm smile. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Dr. Martinez, head of the mathematics department. Do you have a few minutes? I'd like to chat with you about something. Maybe we could talk in my office?" Devon looked surprised but agreed. They walked across campus together, making small talk about how he was adjusting to Riverside. Devon was polite but cautious, clearly wondering why the department head wanted to speak with him. In her office, Dr. Martinez gestured for him to sit in one of the comfortable chairs by her desk. She didn't sit behind her desk, which would have felt too formal and intimidating. Instead, she took the other chair so they were at the same level. "I'm going to be direct with you," she said. "I've heard some concerns about Professor Crawford's class, and I observed today's session myself. I saw how he singled you out with a problem that was well beyond the course material. I'm told this happens regularly." Devon shifted in his seat. "I can handle the problems, ma'am. It's not a big deal." "Maybe not academically," Dr. Martinez said gently, "but that's not the point. Tell me about your background with mathematics. Where did you learn to solve problems like what I saw today?" There was something in her tone that made Devon relax slightly. She didn't sound like she was interrogating him. She sounded genuinely curious and concerned, so Devon told her his story. He grew up in Detroit, in a neighborhood where most kids didn't think about college, but his 7th grade teacher, Mr. Johnson, noticed that Devon could solve math problems in his head that other students needed calculators for. Mr. Johnson pushed him to enter a citywide math competition, which Devon won. That led to a spot in an accelerated program at a magnet school across town. Devon took the bus for 90 minutes each way, but it was worth it. By high school, he'd already finished all the math courses the school offered. His teachers helped him access free online courses from MIT and Stanford. He taught himself calculus, linear algebra, differential equations, even some abstract algebra and real analysis. I didn't have money for tutors or fancy prep courses, Devin explained. Just library books, free online materials, and a lot of practice problems. By the time I graduated high school, I'd learned most of the undergraduate math curriculum on my own. Then why are you in Calculus 2? Dr. Martinez asked, though she had a feeling she knew the answer. I went to community college first to save money, Devin said. But they wouldn't let my math credits transfer because they weren't from an accredited 4-year institution, even though I'd passed all the exams. When I got here, I met with Professor Crawford as my advisor. I told him about my background and showed him some of my work. He said I still needed to start with Calculus 2 because it's a requirement and the university has standards. Dr. Martinez felt her anger rising but kept her voice calm. Did he see your placement exam scores? I guess so. He's the one who scheduled my courses. Dr. Martinez pulled up Devin's file on her computer and turned the screen so Devin could see it. She pointed to the placement scores, the recommendations for advanced placement, the notes about his exceptional mathematical aptitude. You should never have been put in Calculus 2, she said firmly. With these scores in your background, you should be taking courses at least 2 or 3 levels higher, possibly even graduate-level courses. Devin stared at the screen, his expression shifting from confusion to realization to something like anger, though he kept it controlled. I don't understand, he said quietly. Why would he do that? Dr. Martinez had her theories, but she couldn't share them yet. She needed more evidence before making accusations. What she could see clearly was a pattern of behavior that was at best negligent and, at worst, actively harmful to a talented student. I also want to mention something else, Dr. Martinez continued. She pulled up another document. You're here on the Presidential Mathematics Scholarship. That's a full-ride scholarship specifically for exceptional math students from underrepresented backgrounds. It's one of our most prestigious awards. We only give out 3 per year. Devin nodded slowly. I know. It's the only reason I could afford to come here. Professor Crawford, as the undergraduate advisor, would have been notified of all scholarship recipients in mathematics. He would have seen your file, your achievements, everything, and yet he placed you in a basic course and has spent the past month and a half treating you like you don't belong there. The implications hung in the air between them. Devin's jaw tightened. Dr. Martinez could see him processing this information, connecting dots he probably didn't want to connect. What happens now? Devin asked. Now I fix this, Dr. Martinez said firmly. First, I'm moving you to appropriate courses for your level. I'm thinking differential equations to start, possibly concurrent enrollment and introduction to real analysis. We'll figure out exactly where you belong based on your knowledge, not based on what someone decided to put you in. What about Professor Crawford? Leave that to me, Dr. Martinez said. But I need you to know that none of this is your fault. You've done nothing wrong. You showed up, worked hard, and demonstrated exceptional ability. The fact that someone responded to that with hostility instead of encouragement says everything about them, and nothing about you. Devin was quiet for a moment. I've been in situations like this before, he said finally, where people don't expect much from me because of how I look, and when I prove them wrong, they get angry instead of happy. I was hoping college would be different. It should be different, Dr. Martinez said, and there was steel in her voice. And I'm going to make sure it is, at least in this department. You deserve to be challenged by the material, not by prejudice. You deserve mentors who push you forward, not try to hold you back. They talked for another 20 minutes about course options, research opportunities, and what came next. By the time Devin left her office, he looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Dr. Martinez, on the other hand, felt the weight settling onto hers. She had a difficult conversation ahead of her with Professor Crawford. But more than that, she had to confront the fact that this situation might never have come to her attention if students hadn't spoken up. How many other talented students had been mishandled or discouraged? How many had simply given up and transferred or dropped out? She pulled up Crawford's personnel file and started taking notes. This was going to require careful documentation, but Dr. Martinez had spent her entire career fighting for students who deserved better. She wasn't about to stop now. As she worked late into the evening, preparing her case and planning her next steps, Dr. Martinez thought about Devin solving that problem on the board. The confidence, the skill, The alternative method that showed true mathematical creativity. That young man had a bright future ahead of him. She was going to make sure nothing and no one stood in his way. Every year, universities across the region participated in the collegiate mathematics competition. It was a big deal in academic circles. The competition tested students on everything from basic proofs to advanced problem solving. And schools took pride in sending their best and brightest. At Riverside University, Professor Crawford had been the faculty advisor for the math team for over a decade. He was responsible for selecting which students would represent the school. The announcement went up in late October, 3 weeks before the competition. Devin was in the library studying when Lisa texted him. "Did you see the math competition list?"
"You're not on it."
He hadn't seen it yet. Devin packed up his things and walked over to the mathematics building, where a printed roster hung on the bulletin board outside the department office. He scanned the names. Lisa was right. His name wasn't there. The list included 8 students. Devin recognized most of them from various math classes. They were good students, solid problem solvers. But Devin knew without arrogance that he was better. Based purely on ability, he should have been on that list, probably at the top of it. A few other students were looking at the list too. One of them, Kevin from his calculus class, shook his head when he saw Devin. "This is complete garbage," Kevin said. "You should absolutely be on this team. Everyone knows you're the best math student in the undergrad program." "It's Professor Crawford's decision," Devin said quietly, trying to keep his voice neutral even though disappointment sat heavy in his chest. "Yeah, and we all know why he made that decision," Kevin said angrily. "This is the same guy who's been trying to embarrass you all semester." Devin walked away before the conversation could continue. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want to complain or cause problems. But the exclusion stung. The math competition was something he'd actually been looking forward to. A chance to challenge himself against other talented students. Now that door was closed. That evening his phone rang. It was Dr. Martinez. "Devin, I saw the competition roster," she said without preamble. "Tell me you saw it too." "Yes, ma'am." "And you noticed your name wasn't on it despite the fact that you're clearly qualified?" "I noticed," Devin admitted. There was a pause and Devin could hear Dr. Martinez typing on her keyboard. "I'm looking at the selection criteria right now. Team members are supposed to be chosen based on grades, placement exam scores, and demonstrated mathematical ability. You rank number 1 in all 3 categories among undergraduate math students." "Maybe Professor Crawford has other reasons," Devin said, though he didn't really believe that. "I'm sure he does," Dr. Martinez said, and there was an edge to her voice, "and I'm going to override his decision. As department head, I have the authority to add students to the competition team. Consider yourself added." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Devin asked. "Professor Crawford is already angry with me." "This might make things worse." "Devin, let me be very clear about something. You earned a spot on that team through your abilities. The fact that you were excluded is not your problem to manage. It's mine, and I'm going to handle it." 2 days later, a revised roster appeared on the bulletin board. Devin's name had been added at the bottom, along with a note that the addition had been approved by the department head. When Devin walked past it between classes, he noticed several students pointing and talking about it. Some looked happy, others looked concerned about the drama this might cause. In Thursday's calculus class, Professor Crawford was even more cold than usual. He didn't call on Devin at all during the lecture, which was actually a first. The silence felt deliberate, pointed. When class ended, Crawford made an announcement. "For those of you on the mathematics competition team, there's a mandatory meeting tomorrow at 3 in room 204. Be on time." Devin wasn't sure if he was included in that, "those of you," but he showed up to the meeting anyway. When he walked into the room, the other 8 team members were already there along with Professor Crawford. The conversation stopped when Devin entered. Crawford's expression barely changed. "Take a seat," he said flatly. The meeting was about logistics, travel arrangements, the competition schedule, rules, and format. Crawford explained that the competition would be at State College about 2 hours away. They'd leave early Saturday morning and return that evening. The competition itself was 5 hours long with a mix of individual and team problems. "This is a serious academic event," Crawford said. "You're representing Riverside University. I expect professional behavior and strong performances from all of you." He looked around the room as he said this, his eyes passing over Devin without pausing. The message was clear. Devin might be on the team, but Crawford wasn't happy about it. After the meeting, a couple of the other team members approached Devin. "Hey, glad you're on the team," said a girl named Rachel. "I've heard about you from other students. Apparently, you're kind of a math legend around here." "I don't know about that," Devin said with a small smile. "Are you kidding? There are like 3 different group chats where people share stories about the problems Crawford makes you solve. You're famous. It was nice to feel welcomed by the other team members at least." Whatever Crawford's feelings were, the students themselves seemed excited to have Devin joining them. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The team met twice more to practice with sample problems from previous competitions. Devin noticed that Crawford still barely spoke to him directly, giving instructions to the group as a whole rather than engaging with Devin individually. But he couldn't ignore Devin's performance on the practice problems. Devin consistently solved the hardest problems, often finishing faster than anyone else. He'd quietly explain his reasoning when others asked, helping team members who got stuck. Despite Crawford's coldness, Devin tried to be a good teammate. Finally, competition day arrived. Saturday morning, everyone met in the parking lot at 6 in the morning. There was a university van waiting to take them to State College. The drive was quiet. Some students dozed. Others reviewed notes. Devin stared out the window and tried to calm his nerves. They arrived at State College around 8. The campus was buzzing with students from 15 different universities. Everyone wore shirts or badges representing their schools. The energy was competitive but friendly. These were math enthusiasts excited to test themselves. The competition took place in a large auditorium. Hundreds of students filled the seats, each with a packet of problems and a pencil. The rules were simple. 5 hours, 12 problems. Show all your work. Individual scores would be calculated, and team scores would be based on the top 5 individual performers from each school. When the proctor said begin, Devin opened his packet and started reading through the problems. They ranged from theoretical proofs to applied calculations. Some were straightforward. Others were genuinely challenging, the kind of problems designed to separate good problem solvers from exceptional ones. Devin started with what he knew he could solve, building confidence and banking points. Then he moved to the harder problems. There was a number theory question that took him 30 minutes to crack. A topology problem that required some creative thinking about manifolds and boundaries. A differential equations problem where the key was recognizing a hidden symmetry in the system. The 5 hours flew by. When the proctor called time, Devin had attempted all 12 problems and felt confident about at least 10 of them. 2 were still uncertain, places where he'd had to make educated guesses about the approach. Results wouldn't be announced for a week. They had to be scored by a panel of professors from multiple universities to ensure fairness. The team piled back into the van for the ride home. Students compared notes on which problems they'd solved, groaning about the ones that stumped them. "That topology problem was brutal," Kevin said. "I don't think I got it right." "The one about the boundary conditions?" Devin asked. "I think the trick was recognizing it was homeomorphic to a two-sphere with a point removed." Rachel laughed. "You say that like it's obvious." "Sorry," Devin said. "I've just done a lot of topology practice problems." Professor Crawford, sitting in the front passenger seat, said nothing during the entire ride home. A week later, the results came back. Dr. Martinez called Devin into her office with a huge smile on her face. "Sit down," she said, gesturing excitedly. "I just got the competition results." She turned her computer screen toward him. The overall rankings showed 300 students from 15 universities. Devin's name was highlighted. Second place. Out of 300 students, he'd placed second overall. "Devin, do you understand what this means?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Second place in a regional competition as an undergraduate. And look at this." She clicked to another page showing detailed scoring. 2 of Devin's solutions had been marked for special recognition. The judges noted that his approach to the topology problem was exceptionally elegant, and his solution to what was supposed to be the hardest problem on the exam used a novel method that significantly simplified the traditional approach. "The only person who scored higher than you was a graduate, student from Tech University," Dr. Martinez continued. "Everyone else on that list? Behind you, including students from schools with much bigger math programs." Devin felt a wave of emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride certainly, relief, validation. All the hours of self-study, all the library books, all the free online courses, it had all meant something. How did the rest of our team do? He asked. Solid performances across the board. Riverside placed 4th overall as a team, which is our best result in 5 years. And that's largely thanks to you. Your score carried us. The university newsletter published the results that week. There was a photo of the math team, all 9 members standing together. Professor Crawford stood to the side, his expression stiff and formal. The article praised the team's performance and specifically mentioned Devon's second-place finish. Around campus, students started recognizing Devon. Hey, you're that math guy, someone would say in the cafeteria. A professor from the physics department stopped him to ask if he'd be interested in a research project. The Career Center reached out about scholarship opportunities. It felt surreal. A few months ago, Devon had been just another transfer student trying to make it work. Now he was being celebrated, recognized for something he'd worked so hard to achieve. But there was one person who wasn't celebrating. In calculus class the following week, Professor Crawford's attitude hadn't changed. If anything, he seemed even more withdrawn. He still called on Devon regularly, but now with complete detachment, like Devon was just another student instead of someone who'd just proven himself at a regional level. Devon tried not to let it bother him. He had other professors who were supportive. He had classmates who respected him. He had proof now, documented and official, that he belonged here and that his abilities were real. Still, as he sat in Crawford's classroom and solved another advanced problem on the board, while the professor watched with that same blank expression, Devon couldn't help but wonder what it would take for Crawford to actually see him. Not as a challenge or a threat or whatever he represented in Crawford's mind, just as a student who loved mathematics and wanted to learn. The mathematics department held monthly research seminars where professors and graduate students presented their current work. It was usually a small gathering, maybe 20 or 30 people at most. Faculty members, grad students, and occasionally advanced undergraduates who were genuinely interested in cutting-edge mathematics. Devon had started attending these seminars in November, after Dr. Martinez suggested it might be good for him to see what research-level mathematics looked like. Most of the presentations went over his head to some degree, but he enjoyed the challenge of trying to follow along, of seeing where the boundaries of mathematical knowledge were being pushed. The December seminar featured Professor Crawford, presenting his latest research on applied differential equations. Specifically, he was working on models for fluid dynamics with applications in climate science. It was impressive work, the kind of thing that gets published in respected journals. Devon sat in the back row of the small seminar room, notebook open, trying to follow the mathematical arguments. Crawford moved through slides showing various equations, boundary conditions, and numerical simulations. About 30 minutes into the presentation, one of the graduate students raised her hand. Professor Crawford, I'm having trouble understanding how you're handling the boundary conditions in equation 7. It seems like there might be an issue with the transformation you applied. Crawford paused, looked at the slide, and started to explain. But as he talked, it became clear he was struggling to address the concern. He pulled up another slide, then went back, his explanations getting more convoluted and less clear. The graduate student pressed further. I'm sorry, but I still don't see how that resolves the discontinuity at the boundary. Wouldn't that cause the model to break down? Crawford's face was starting to flush. Other faculty members were leaning forward, looking more carefully at the equations on the screen. Someone else murmured something about stability conditions. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from polite interest to academic scrutiny. Devon stared at the equations on the screen. He could see what the graduate student was talking about. There was a problem with how Crawford had set up the boundary conditions, but he also thought he might see a solution. His hand started to rise, then he hesitated. After everything that had happened, did he really want to jump into this? But mathematics was mathematics. Truth didn't care about personal conflicts or hurt feelings. If there was an error in the work, it should be addressed. And if Devon could help fix it, wasn't that more important than protecting egos? His hand went up. Dr. Martinez, who was sitting near the front, noticed and nodded at him. Yes, Devon, she said, all eyes turned to the back row. Devon saw Professor Crawford's expression change, surprise mixed with something else. Dread, maybe? I think I might see the issue, Devon said, keeping his voice respectful, and possibly a way to fix it, may I? Dr. Martinez gestured toward the front. Devin walked to the whiteboard next to the projection screen. He picked up a marker and started writing. The problem is that the transformation introduces a discontinuity at the boundary, like was mentioned, Devin explained. But if we apply a different transformation, one that preserves the smoothness at the boundary, it should resolve the issue. He wrote out the mathematical steps, showing how a different approach to the transformation would maintain the necessary continuity. It wasn't a trivial fix. It required reworking several parts of the model. But it worked. The mathematics held together. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Devin's marker on the whiteboard. He filled one board, moved to another, showing how this new approach would propagate through the rest of the model. He noted where equations would need to be updated, where new stability analyses would be required. When he finished and stepped back, there was a long moment of quiet. Then Dr. Martinez started nodding. "That's brilliant," she said. "That actually resolves the issue elegantly." Other faculty members joined in, asking Devin questions about his approach. He answered clearly, showing where he'd gotten the idea from similar problems in the literature. The graduate student who'd raised the original concern was smiling, clearly pleased that the issue had been identified and solved. For 15 minutes, the seminar became a discussion of Devin's solution. Faculty members debated the implications, suggested extensions, talked about how this could improve the model's accuracy. It was the kind of mathematical conversation that happened among peers, among researchers working together to advance knowledge. Professor Crawford stood to the side, watching it all unfold. His face had gone through several shades of red and was now settling into something pale. He'd come to present his research and instead had been shown a significant flaw in his work. And an undergraduate student, the same student he'd been dismissing and targeting for months, had solved it in front of everyone. Eventually, the discussion wound down. Dr. Martinez thanked Devin for his contribution and suggested that Crawford might want to collaborate with Devin on revising the paper before submission. Crawford nodded stiffly, barely making eye contact. After the seminar ended, several people wanted to talk with Devin. A professor from applied mathematics asked about his background. 2 graduate students wanted to discuss research opportunities. Dr. Martinez pulled him aside and told him she was impressed, that his insight showed genuine research potential. But Devin found himself watching Professor Crawford, who was packing up his laptop with mechanical movements, his jaw tight. After most people had cleared out, Devin walked over to him. "Professor Crawford," he said quietly, "I hope I didn't overstep. I just saw a solution and thought it might help." Crawford looked at him for a long moment. Something in his expression was different. The walls were still there, but there were cracks now. "We need to talk," Crawford said finally. "Not here, my office. Can you come by during my office hours tomorrow?" Devin agreed, though he felt anxious about what that conversation might bring. The next afternoon, Devin knocked on Professor Crawford's office door. Crawford called him in and gestured to a chair. The office was lined with books, mathematical journals, and photos of various academic conferences. It was the office of someone who dedicated his life to mathematics. "I owe you an apology," Crawford said without preamble. "I've thought about this all night, and that's the only place to start." Devin said nothing, waiting. "When you walked into my classroom on the first day, I made assumptions," Crawford continued. His voice was strained, like the words were difficult to push out. "I saw a young black student, and some part of me immediately doubted your abilities. When you solved that first problem instead of being impressed, I felt threatened, like you were challenging my authority or trying to show off." He paused, looking down at his hands. "The truth is, I've been teaching the same material the same way for 20 years. I've gotten comfortable, and when someone came along who was clearly beyond what I was teaching, someone who made me realize my own limitations, I reacted badly. Instead of seeing it as an opportunity to mentor exceptional talent, I saw it as a threat." "The fact that you're black," Crawford said, meeting Devin's eyes now, "made it easier for me to rationalize my behavior. I told myself I was maintaining standards, being rigorous, making sure you really knew what you claimed to know. But I never treated other students that way. I never challenged them constantly or tried to catch them making mistakes." Devin listened, his emotions complicated. Part of him was angry that it had taken this long for Crawford to see what he'd been doing. Another part was just tired. "I'm not telling you this to make excuses," Crawford continued. "There are no excuses. I let my own insecurities and unconscious biases harm a student. A brilliant student who deserves support and encouragement, not hostility. Yesterday, watching you solve a problem that stumped me, seeing the way other faculty and students respected your insight, I couldn't hide from what I've been doing anymore. What happens now? Devin asked quietly. Now I have to do better, Crawford said. I've already spoken with Dr. Martinez. I'm stepping down as undergraduate advisor. I'm also going to undergo training on implicit bias and inclusive teaching practices. The university offers programs for faculty, and I should have done this years ago. He pulled out a file and slid it across the desk. Devin opened it and saw several documents. Research opportunities in the mathematics department. Graduate school information. A letter of recommendation that Crawford had written, describing Devin's exceptional mathematical abilities in glowing terms. I can't undo the semester we've had, Crawford said, but I can stop standing in your way. You have a gift, Devin, a real gift. You see patterns and solutions that most people miss. You have the kind of mathematical intuition that can't really be taught, and you deserve to be in an environment that cultivates that, not one that tries to tear it down. Devin looked at the papers, then back at Crawford. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you put me in Calculus 2 when my placement scores said I should be in advanced courses? Crawford's face fell. Because I looked at your file and saw a community college transfer student from Detroit, and I assumed the placement scores must have been a fluke. I assumed you couldn't possibly be as good as the numbers suggested. I was wrong. About all of it. They sat in silence for a moment. Devin felt something loosening in his chest. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It was too soon for that. But it was acknowledgement. It was Crawford finally seeing him clearly. I appreciate you saying all this, Devin said finally. I really do. This semester has been hard, feeling like I had to prove myself every single day. Like one mistake would confirm what I felt like you already believed about me. That wears on you. I know, Crawford said. And I'm sorry. Devin stood up, gathering the papers. I don't know if things can be normal between us, but I'm willing to try if you are. Crawford stood and extended his hand. Devin hesitated, then shook it. Over the following weeks, things slowly changed. Devin moved into the advanced courses Dr. Martinez had arranged, including a graduate seminar on real analysis. He started working with Dr. Martinez on a research project involving optimization algorithms. The work was challenging in a good way, stretching his abilities without the emotional weight of proving himself to someone who didn't want to believe in him. Professor Crawford kept his word. He completed the bias training and started changing how he taught his classes. Devin heard from other students that Crawford was more thoughtful now, more careful about who he called on and how he framed challenges. The change wasn't perfect, but it was real. In March, Devin's research with Dr. Martinez led to a paper that was accepted for presentation at a regional mathematics conference. He was one of the youngest undergraduates on the program. When he presented his work, several professors from other universities approached him about graduate programs. One afternoon, Devin ran into Professor Crawford in the mathematics building. They hadn't spoken much since that conversation in Crawford's office, mostly just polite nods in passing. Devin, Crawford said, I heard about your paper acceptance. Congratulations, that's a significant achievement. Thank you, Devin said. I mean it, Crawford added. Watching you work this semester, seeing what you're capable of when given the right opportunities, it's reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. It's not about maintaining authority or proving how smart I am. It's about helping students reach their potential. I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. You helped me find it again. Devin nodded slowly. You know, when I first came to Riverside, I was nervous. Transfer student, first in my family to go to a 4-year college, coming from a community where people don't always expect much from kids who look like me. I was scared I wouldn't belong here. And then I made it worse, Crawford said. You did, Devin agreed. But here's the thing I've learned. My worth as a mathematician, as a student, as a person, it doesn't depend on whether you or anyone else believes in me. I know what I'm capable of. I always have. What I needed from this place was opportunity, not validation. You deserved both, Crawford said, and I'm glad you're getting them now. 2 years later, Devin graduated summa cum laude with the highest GPA in the mathematics department. He'd published 2 papers, won multiple academic awards, and been accepted to PhD programs at 5 top-tier universities. He chose MIT, going back to the place whose free online courses had started his mathematical journey years ago. At graduation, Professor Crawford was in the audience. He watched as Devin walked across the stage to thunderous applause, as Dr. Martinez beamed with pride, as Devin's mother cried happy tears in the front row. After the ceremony, Crawford approached Devin and his family. "Mrs. Walker," he said, shaking her hand, "you've raised an exceptional young man. He's going to do great things in mathematics." "I know," she said with a proud smile. "I always knew." Devin eventually did do great things. He got his PhD, became a professor himself, and returned to Riverside University to teach years later. He became known for his research, but also for his teaching, for the way he could see potential in students that others might overlook. And in his office, he kept a reminder of his own journey. It was a framed photo from that mathematics competition, the one where he placed second out of 300 students. In the photo, he's standing with his team, young and hopeful, on the edge of proving what he'd always known was true. That talent, brilliance, and determination weren't defined by anyone's expectations or assumptions. They were defined by the work, by the dedication, by the willingness to keep solving problems even when the problems weren't just mathematical, and most importantly, that everyone deserved to be seen for who they really were, not who others assumed they must be. Years later, when Professor Crawford retired, he wrote a final reflection for the department newsletter. In it, he talked about the lessons he'd learned in his final years of teaching, how one student had taught him more about education, about bias, and about the true purpose of teaching than all his years in the classroom. He didn't name Devin. He didn't have to. Everyone who'd been there knew the story. It had become part of the department's culture, a reminder that great teaching meant recognizing greatness, nurturing it, and never letting personal limitations stand in the way of student potential. And somewhere in Boston, in his office at MIT, Dr. Devin Walker was working on the same kind of elegant mathematical problems he'd always loved. Only now he was also teaching the next generation, making sure that every student who walked into his classroom felt seen, valued, and capable of achieving whatever their talent could reach, because he knew from experience how much that could change a life.